Okay. So we're glad to have everyone joining us today. And if you would put in the chat where you are viewing from this summer. And are you seeing, I should have changed, I left migrants in there, but what birds are you seeing this week? And where this month, today?
Karen, there are migrants now.
Migrating.
Yeah, it's early. I mean, right, they're starting back south. I think when I wrote this.
Yeah, hooded warbler and other warblers are seeing Peter in our local park today.
Oh, neat.
I saw
Where,
yellow
Margie?
warbler,
Where?
Pinecraft,
Oh,
a red start, hooded warbler, and a Louisiana water thrush. And
oh,
on
mhm.
Sunday, I saw a yellow female warbler in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Well, good. So,
I love hooded. It's one of my favorites.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Can I see the chat?
yeah, if you type on chat, it should open up.
Okay.
Yep.
So I
But
don't see.
nobody's posting anything yet. Let's hear it, guys.
It
There's
just says that hosts and panelists can.
well, if you change that, hit the down arrow and then you can click on everyone and then you can see.
I don't have everyone. There is
Yeah.
no everyone.
You don't have, even if you hit the down arrow, it doesn't give you a everyone choice.
No,
No.
it just lists the host and panelists.
Huh. All right, let me see if there's something I can fix on that. There's my panelist. Oh, there we go. I fixed it for you guys.
Yeah.
And these can chat with everyone. Okay, I fixed it. Everyone can chat with everyone now. So
All right.
please tell us again, everyone now, now you can enter into the chat where you're viewing from and what migrants you're seeing. Here we go.
There we
Holly
go.
Trell from West Palm. Maureen
okay,
Dwyer from
Pennsylvania.
Haverford, Pennsylvania. And I'm here calling in from Asheville, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Carol Breeds says, love you, Jean. Cooper City on the other coast. Lil, welcome. Deborah Green from Winter Garden in the middle of the state.
Yeah.
Diane Wallace from Sarasota.
Some people are just sending it out to the hosts and panelists.
Oh, yes, you get, well, I'll read it anyway. So Tom Literal, we're knee deep in Florida scrub jays in Venice. Wonderful. James Marcy is in Cleveland, Ohio, and Griffin in Lancaster, New Hampshire. Carol Brown in Wilmington, Delaware. See all our folks going to the cooler climes.
Berkeley, Michigan. There you go.
Yeah. Rob and Debbie, welcome from Bradenton. Suzanne, welcome from St. Pete. She's our media person. Clay Lisnick from Okeechobee. Lovely. Hey, Pam in Sarasota. Jim in Venice. Some great crested caracara sightings at Carlton Preserve. Nice.
Mhm.
Great bird.
Okay. Mary Ellen from Sarasota. Anybody seeing fun birds besides Jim? Yeah, and you'll notice the title of the talk has changed. Peter's hit past 9,900, so he's getting there. Margie saw a yellow warbler. How fun. Mary Alice Curtis in Lakewood Ranch, Eastern Corner, saw a towhee, common yellowthroat, northern bobwhite wandering the fields. Nice. Betsy Anderson in Alexandria, Virginia.
My sister.
Yeah, right. And our host, our speaker tonight, Peter, is from Cockeysville, Maryland. Blue grosbeaks. How fun.
Grobeeks.
Grobeeks. I knew what you meant. I read it properly, even if it was spelled wrong. Oh, Maureen Dwyer went to Maine to see puffins. I hope you had success. And
It's
Carolyn
a
Primus.
lifer puffin for me in Maine.
Oh,
There was a tufted puffin there a couple
wow.
weeks ago.
wow.
Tufted
When-
puffin, wow.
Primus is seeing black-crowned night heron in Sarasota. Well, they're lovely and they're not that common, so you don't have to worry about competing.
Hmm.
Yes, I will send a link to Wade. Okay. All right, and Maureen saw, hundreds on Machias Seal Island.
Machias, yeah,
Machias,
Machias
thank you.
Seal Island, off Maine. It's wonderful.
Great. See all that. See hundreds. That's exciting. Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop share and we can get started.
So shall I say hello to everybody
Yeah,
and get,
go
we
ahead.
have
Yeah, sorry.
64. Okay,
Oh, and because I'm sending this link. You asked me to, so go ahead and I'll
okay, great.
I'll
Hi, everybody. This is Jean Dubie, the president of Sarasota Audubon, as you probably know. We have a wonderful midsummer treat for you today. We are going to learn and hear from Peter Kaestner about a wonderful program. He is an avid birder. He's the kind of birder that we would all love to be. But life gets in the way for most of us, so we can't do the kind of traveling that he does, but I can't wait to listen to him. Everything's going fine at the Nature Center. We still have a few people who come in every day. We have people in the gardens. If you live in Sarasota and you can tolerate some morning heat, we would love to have you at the Nature Center helping us in the garden. Get there early. Andy gets in there at about 7 o'clock in the morning. So if you come and put in an hour or so, and then you'll be home in time for breakfast. So there's nothing much else to say. Things are quiet there. Lynn is still busy with the Wingspan. The Wingspan games are going on during the summer. So if you have any interest in that, you could take a look. I think that's posted on the website or in the last e-blast anyway. So that's about it. We're all trying to stay cool here in Florida, and we know that other people around the country are having issues with weather. We hope you can stay cool and dry as we are trying to do. So now I'm going to turn it over to Margie, who's going to introduce our speaker, and I can't wait for this program. So we'll see you later on.
I'm going to jump in first with a few housekeeping details. You probably all know the drill, but if you have questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It's the icon with the little bubbles. So we have about 70 people on. If you have any other questions that are not related, you can put it in the chat, but we ask you the questions for Peter to go into the Q&A. It helps us at the end to keep track of what's what. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Margie.
Thank you very much. I'm just absolutely thrilled to welcome Peter Kaestner. And I just want to draw your attention at the very start to the new title, the new celebratory title of this talk, which is 0 to 9,900, a lifetime of birding with Peter Kaestner. And when we set up this talk, it was 0 to 9,800. So you can already see Peter's on a super Zoom fast track. So Sarasota Audubon is, of course, thrilled to have Peter here today. And before we have him talk, I just want to acknowledge that this is a very special full moon night called Lammas or Lunesada. You may know better, Jean, with the Celtic, but it's an ancient Celtic cross-quarter fire festival that celebrates the earliest first harvest and opens the doorway into autumn in the north. And right here in Florida, we could use a little more cool air of autumn, but we celebrate Lammas those of us that do, by gathering things that represent the coming of fall, and things such as wheat stalks, corn, berries, and pumpkins. But because it's already a time of harvest, I want to invite us all to include in the thoughts of harvest good fortune in finding and enjoying and protecting newfound and existing bird species during this and all seasons, for all people, and for you, Peter, to wish you on your way to get to that 10,000 goal. So as of today, Peter holds eBird's biggest world list at 9,679. Is that correct, or am I already out of date?
Correct.
Okay, good. But elsewhere, I've seen your numbers were at 9,864 species, which meant that you needed about 121 species to get to 10,000.
Yeah, I'm 9879 in IOC list.
Thank you. So he's a passionate world lister, as I don't need to tell you, who represented the United States for 36 years as a U.S. Foreign Services consular officer overseas. So always birding in his spare time. He's now retired and works part-time as a tour leader for Rock Jumper Birding Tours. And along the way, he's birded in 181 eBird countries or locales. Peter graduated from Cornell in biology and served in the Peace Corps for 2 years in Zaire. Among the many fascinating facts of his life so far is Peter is recognized in the Guinness Book of Records as the first person to see a representative of every bird family in the world. In 1989, near Bogota, Colombia, where he was a U.S. consular officer, he discovered a species new to science called the Kundanara marca antpitta, the Graularia Kaestneri, which was subsequently named after him. In 2001, on 9/11, his flight from Ethiopia was diverted to Newfoundland, Canada. And if you know the musical Come From Away, he was one of the actual people situated in Newfoundland. His first eBird list was August 4th, 1957. And it looks like it was an orchard oriole. And I think you were 4 years old.
Something about that, yes.
And finally,
I did the eBird list after the fact. I didn't actually complete it on the list. It's a historical list.
And he's eBird reviewer for 3 exotic countries, whole countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Djibouti in East Africa. So thank you very much, Peter. Take it away.
All right. All right, Margie, thank you. Let me, since I assume nobody can see me. Can anybody see me?
Yes.
Okay, they can see me. All right.
Okay,
Well, then
everybody can see you, even
I'll say hello just for a moment and then I'll share my screen. I just want to say that I'm delighted to be here and to thank Karen and Margie and Jean for setting this up. We just had a very delightful chat, warming up the computers and making sure everything was working correctly. I often, if I'm giving a talk, I try to start it with a bit of a joke, just to sort of warm up the audience. So I'll tell you my public speaking joke. When I was working in the State Department in the mid-1990s, I was working for the Office of Ecology and Terrestrial Conservation, and I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to talk about what the State Department was doing for international conservation. And it was a sort of a typical place. We were up in a very, very tall bank building. The top floor is beautiful view out over the valley and the Sandia Mountains. And we had a very nice lunch. And at the end of the lunch, the MC said, "Peter, it's time for your talk." So I go up to the podium, and as I get to the podium, they serve the dessert, which are chocolate sundaes, and they were beautiful. And I'm sitting there at the podium, and everybody's eating chocolate sundaes except for me. And even worse is, as I'm talking, I just watch my chocolate sundae melt into a big white and black puddle of blood. So at the end of the talk, I just absolutely, all I could think about was the melted ice cream. So I went up to the MC afterwards and I said, hey, it broke my heart to lose that hot fudge sundae. Do you think that maybe we could go back in the kitchen and get one? And he said, oh, sure. We'll go back. So we went back into the kitchen, and all the kitchen staff was sitting around this giant prep table, and they're all eating hot fudge sundaes. And I asked if they had one more, and they said, nope, we just ate the last one. So sometimes you don't always get what you want. Anyway, let me get on to my talk here. Oops, that was not good. There we go. I'm assuming the screen sharing is working.
All good.
Okay, very good. Alrighty. So this is, apart from the date, which I understand is not correct. I'm actually not at 9,900 yet. I'm 21 birds short, but I thought I was close enough to claim it. And I'm going off a week from today to Indonesia to find the 21 birds. So I should be at 9,900 before long. You can see the photo in my eBird profile is that day when I saw the orchard oriole. I wouldn't say it was a spark bird, but it's the earliest bird that I have a record of having seen. And the reason is that my father took a photograph of the bird. You might be able to see on the ground, their little dark spots. We're standing under a mulberry tree, and the orchard oriole was eating mulberries at my grandparents' house. So that's how I know that I saw the orchard oriole on that day. So this is what my eBird numbers look like, and my eBird map. I've been to 190 eBird countries and territories as of today, and I won't be adding to it anytime soon. I was hoping to go to Tunisia and Libya over here this summer, but the trip was canceled. In 2025, I'm planning eBird or rock jumper tours to Mongolia and Cambodia and Laos. So I'll get 3 more countries then. This is what it looks like with the IOC. The IOC and eBird have different taxonomies. And as you can see, it's exactly 200 birds more than I have with the latest version of the IOC checklist. So needless to say, when I claim my numbers, I claim my numbers with IOC, since I get 200 for free. This is how it started, standing in a field of ripe mulberries. It's another picture of me. I'm the guy on the left-hand side. My brother is the tallest. My brother Hank is 8 years older, and Hank began birding when he was 10 years old, and I was just 2. So it's just a couple of years after that I was able to start birding on my own and remember what I was doing. I had a very good fortune in 1967-68 to spend a school year in New Delhi, India. Here I am in a village in Rajasthan. And as was mentioned, I went to Cornell 1971 to 76. I fully intended to become an ornithologist, but was pretty much talked out of it by the director of the laboratory, who was a fairly uninspiring guy. He was not very positive about the whole business of ornithology. While I was at Cornell, I had the fortune to be a teaching assistant in the ornithology course, which was great fun. And one of the things that we did in the course is we studied all the families of birds. And it was at that time I figured that it would be impossible for me to compete with the top world listers, who back at those days had like 4,000 birds. That I would never have the time and the money that it would take to do that. So I set myself a goal of finding all the bird families. And within about 10 years, I was able to get the last one. Now, one of the things that has changed over time, this is the book on the left is a coded list of birds of the world. This is the first one volume list of the birds. It had about 8,600 species in it. It was written by a guy named Buck Edwards from Sweetbriar University, Sweetbriar College. And one of the interesting things, if you look in the sort of the upper center part of this, you can see the genus Cytholopus. And in 1974, when this was published, there were 12 Cytholopus tapaculos. By 2006, there are 38 Cytholopus tapaculos. And by December of 2022, there are 49 Cytholopus tapaculos. Do pardon my rather infantile notations on these. I haven't figured out how to put professional graphics on these, so I just did it with my finger. But you get the idea. Again, it was mentioned I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I was a school teacher, a science teacher in the school here. This white building right in the lower center is my home. Had an absolutely fabulous time living there. It was a place that Zaire is now called the Democratic Republic of Congo. Is right now, this whole village has been burned to the ground. And most of the people in it killed because of the horrible civil war that's going on. But while I was there, it was a tranquil paradise. It was really, really nice. Here I am in my teacher preparation area. And while I was in Zaire, I was an honorary field affiliate of the Laboratory of Ornithology. The person from the Laboratory of Natural Sounds lent me a full recording setup. And it was interesting, just 2 days ago, I got an email from a professional bird guide who had been leading a tour in Uganda, and he was using Merlin to pull up bird calls and to show the clients on his bird tour what the bird sounded like. And he sent me an email because he said a very large number of the birds in Uganda, the recordings were made by me in 1976 and 1977 in Zaire. So it's great to know that those efforts are still bearing fruit these many, many decades later. While I was in Zaire, I saw my 1,000th bird. This is the black-capped waxbill. And before I left, I actually got my 2,000th bird. But while I was in there, I was able to visit the Virunga National Park, and this is the first one of my many stories. While I was in Virunga Park, I was staying at a safari lodge and was told not to leave the safari lodge because there was dangerous wildlife. But I noticed out the back of the lodge, there was a trail down to the river. You can see behind this buffalo is a bit of a valley, and there's some riparian vegetation there because there's a water course. And I'd seen on the behind where I'm pointing, say off to my right, is a path that goes down to another part of the river where the employees of the safari lodge would go down to wash their clothes and things. I said, well, look, if these guys go walking out in the bush, I mean, I'm a Peace Corps volunteer, I go walking in the bush all the time, so it's not a problem. So I decided to walk down to the river and do some birding. And as I walked down, there is this male Cape buffalo, which is one of the most dangerous animals in Africa. And it was grazing on the side of the road, maybe 30, 40 feet away. And I figured that the animal was going to mind his own business and he was going to graze. And I was just going to walk past him on the road and I would mind my own business and he would mind his own business. Unfortunately, when I got to the point where I was the closest away from the animal on the road, he stopped grazing, raised his head, started snorting and pawing the ground, just like they do in the comics before the bull attacks and runs over the poor cartoon character. So I immediately froze so the animal wouldn't see me. They don't have particularly good eyesight. And I figured that if I didn't move, he wouldn't be able to see me. And even though I was standing right in front of him, and lo and behold, I froze. And after what seemed like 5 or 6 hours, which was probably maybe a 30 or 40 seconds, he put his head back down and started grazing again. And instead of walking along the road, I walked directly backwards away from him so that I would not move vis-a-vis the background. So I figured that would have less chance of him seeing me again. And I walked back and went back to the safari lodge and never left it on my own on foot. While I was in Zaire, I was able to climb the Ruwenzori Mountains. The Ruwenzori Mountains are along the border of Uganda and Zaire, Congo. And from the Congo side, you can go up to 4,400 meters, which is around 14,000 feet or so. And one of the interesting things is you have to walk all the way up. There's no road or anything. So you actually start walking at about maybe 6,000 feet or so. So it's about 8,000 feet of vertical gain. You do it over 3 days, so it's not too bad. There are wonderful birds up there. Now, I need everybody to pay attention because you need to remember something that I'm going to tell you, and you need to remember it for the end of the talk. So you're going to have to keep this in your brain. Nobody yelling squirrel or anything for a full 45 to 50 minutes. So while I was younger, I used to date women, girls, and it seemed I always had better luck impressing the mothers of the girls that I was interested in rather than the girls themselves. And one of the ways that the mothers used to compliment me is by saying that I looked like Robert Redford. All right, hold that thought. Towards the end of my stay and as a Peace Corps volunteer, this guy on right here, the second from the right, with a t-shirt on, because he's the only one with a t-shirt. His name is Joel Abramson. He just passed away, I think, a year ago or so. He was an internist in Miami, and he ran a bird tour company called Bird Bonanzas. He learned that I was in Zaire and organized to my knowledge, the only bird tour that's ever gone to that part of the world. And along with me, I'm on the left. To my right, or to my left, is Arnold Small, who was the then president of the ABA. The next guy is Norm Chesterfield, who is the #1 world birder at the time. And then Joel, who was one of the top 5 bird watchers in the world. And the next guy is Martin Edwards, who was the second person in the world to see all of the bird families. So it's a great trip. This is standing in front of Mount Kahuzi in Kahuzi National Park, which is just west of Bukavu and Goma, Zaire, west of Lake Kivu. So after my Peace Corps experience, I signed up to enter the U.S. Foreign Service. And the reason I did that is while I was in the Peace Corps, what I decided I really wanted to do is to be a birder. And the best way to be a world birder was to join the Foreign Service and become a U.S. diplomat. Fortunately, there are no requirements to become a U.S. diplomat apart from being a U.S. citizen and being between the ages of 21 and 65. And since I met those 2 criteria, all I had to do was to pass an entrance exam that was taken back in those days by about 25,000 people a year. And fortunately, I'm a very good multiple choice test taker. I usually do very well in those kinds of tests. And also, while I was in the Peace Corps, though I was a science teacher, I taught a course in English as a foreign language. And when you teach English as a foreign language, you learn the grammar and how the language works really, really well. And that served me very well in the test, because a large part of the Foreign Service test happened to be about communication and using English language. So I was very fortunate in that regard. This is a picture of the US Embassy, the consular section in the US Embassy in New Delhi, India, where I was from 1981 to 1982. And here I am issuing visas. As a junior officer, the work is fairly tedious. I did as many as 350 visa interviews a day and refused about 20% of the applicants. While I was in India, I got a Canon camera with a 500 millimeter mirror lens and took some pictures. This is one of my favorites of an anhinga. So these are all decades old slides that I've scanned and turned into digital. One of the interesting things about the anhinga is the complete molt, simultaneous molt of all the wing feathers. You can see the primary feathers here, secondary feathers here, tertiary feathers here, scapulars on the top, the uropygial gland, the base of the tail, and these interesting undulations on the tail. I've never read why they do that or how. My favorite bird in India always has been the jungle babbler. This is a picture of a jungle, one of several jungle babblers that were going crazy in my front yard on the hottest day in May of 1982. The temperature was about 115 degrees, and these guys were all sitting out sunning themselves in the heat of the day. The jungle babblers have amazing personalities. If anybody's been to India, they're great, great animals. Here's a white-throated kingfisher. Another interesting thing about India are the vultures. This is a very typical scene back in the early 1980s. And sadly, over time, the use of a veterinary analgesic called diclofenac was introduced into the cow, mostly the cow population. You can see these animals are eating a dead cow. And they would give the analgesic to the cows so they wouldn't suffer as they got old. Then they died, and when the vultures ate the cows that had diclofenac in their tissues, the vultures died. And right now, the vultures, I think there are probably three species of vultures in this picture, maybe four. They're all critically endangered now. The numbers went from the millions down to into the hundreds. I had mentioned, I showed you a picture of my brother, and when I was just starting off, and as I said, my brother started when he was 10 and I was 2, and he's always been my mentor. It's my brother Hank, who's on my right. On the left is a guy named Bolu Khan. This photograph was taken at Bharatpur Sanctuary, which is not too far from New Delhi, a little over an hour away. It's a real water wonderland. As I'd mentioned earlier, I'd set myself a task of finding all of the bird families. And in the Orient, there are not a lot of endemic families. Most of the families in the Orient are shared with Africa. But there are a couple of unique ones. One of them are the pittas, which are shared with the sort of the western part of the Pacific. The leaf birds and green birds, which are basically just oriental. And then the most unusual bird, which is the ibisbill. And the ibisbill nests in the high Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau. Back in the day, back in the early 1980s, their wintering grounds were unknown. Now the birds are known to winter at the base of the Himalayas, and they're relatively easy to see today. But back in the early 80s, nobody knew where to see them. This book, which was published around when I was born in the early 1950s and had been researched back in the 30s and 40s, talked about the breeding birds of Kashmir, and the ibisbill does breed in Kashmir in a place called the Wardwan Valley. And to get to the Audubon Valley, you have to walk up this trail, and it's about 25 miles up over a pass called the Margon Pass. The Margon Pass means the pass of death. I went up there over the Labor Day weekend because I was always busy doing visa interviews, so I couldn't take off any time. But I was able to go up on a 3-day weekend. I flew to Kashmir on a Friday after work, drove to the beginning of this trail, then walked over the 13,000-foot pass down into the Audubon Valley. You can see behind me is a group of people. These are Gujar nomadic tribesmen that spend the summers up in the high valleys, and then they migrate down into the main valley of Kashmir, the Vale of Kashmir, for the wintertime. And the reason that this pass is called the Margon Pass is that one September, there's a very early snowstorm, and several dozen of these migratory Gujars were killed as they were trying to make it across the high altitude pass in the snowstorm. So after 25 miles of hiking that day, I get to a point and I suddenly realized that I was standing at the same place where Bates and Lothier had taken a photograph of the breeding grounds of the ibisbill back in the 1940s and had published in their book of the breeding birds of Kashmir. And I realized that I was at that exact vantage point that the photograph had been taken. And I put my binoculars up and darned if there wasn't an ibisbill sitting right in front of me. So the sun has set. There's just, sort of the evening gloom. Needless to say, it's a pretty crummy photograph, but this is the ibisbill in the Audubon Valley. So the first thing the next morning, I turned around and walked 25 miles back to the valley. That was on Sunday, and then went back to Srinagar, and Monday flew back to New Delhi. One of the best days, as I said, I spent a lot of time issuing visas, but one day the ambassador said that the secretary of the Smithsonian was coming to town and asked if I would take him out bird watching for the day. So the tall guy is S. Dillon Ripley, who was the secretary of the Smithsonian and a very famous ornithologist that studied Indian birds. The guy with the glasses is Salim Ali, who is sort of like the Roger Troy Peterson of India. Wrote the first popular, one of the first really popular field guide. There was a couple of guides before his, but none of them had the same popularity. And he was a real living legend. I was able to take these two guys out birding for the day, which was just great fun. Now I want to show you a little bit about how I found birds. So I'm a diplomat. I'm not married, traveling around the world, living in different places. But back in the early 1980s, there was very little information on where you could find things. This book was published in 1981 and is an absolute treasure trove. It has information on, I think, about 150 different spots. And here's just one example of the Boston, New York, Washington. And it has maps, it has specific places to go birding, and also has lists of birds that you can see in those different places. And there are places in the US, there are places in Brazil and Africa, all over the world are covered. And they're covered fairly from a high level without tremendous amount of detail, but notwithstanding that, it has invaluable information for me trying to find things. Now, this photograph was taken on the 1st of October of 1986, and I am in Iguazu Falls, Argentina, and I had just seen in this little patch to the right of me my 159th bird family, the Conopophagidae, or gnat eaters, the rufous gnat eater. So this is when I got the record that I'm in the Guinness Book of Records for. And one of the interesting things about this story, I actually got I got information from Bob Ridgely, who was a famous ornithologist that studies South American birds and a conservationist. And he had given me directions on how to find this bird in Iguazu. And when I went out to look for it, I arrived one evening and I went out to sort of stake out the area, and there were fresh leopard tracks or jaguar tracks in the dirt. So rather than going out pre-dawn to be at the right spot as the sun came up, I got a vehicle to drive me out there so I wouldn't get eaten on the way out. The other thing that's interesting about this is that Joel Abramson, who was the guy that ran Bird Bonanza Tours, who was in the photograph of us at Mount Cahuzi Park. Joel Abramson had been corresponding with the Guinness Records people for some time, because he had intended to be the first person to see every bird family. And I had actually heard through the grapevine, I'm not quite sure how, because there's no internet back then, but somehow I'd heard that he was going to Madagascar for this third trip to try to find a ground roller. The first two times he'd been to Madagascar, he had missed ground rollers. And I'd heard that in October of 1986, he was going to get the ground roller, which would have been his last bird family. So I made a hurried trip down to Rwanda to see the whale-headed stork, and then to South America to get three families that I was missing: the sharp bill, the trumpeter, and then finally the gnat eater. So it was it's got wonderful help from Bob Ridgely. When I was once I'd seen the bird, I had sent a postcard to Joel Abramson and told him that I had broken the record. Joel, being a real birder, and birders are great people, Joel wrote to the Guinness Book of Records and told them that I had beat him at this quest that he had been doing for the last decade or so. So I got a letter from the Guinness Book of Records asking me if I had done this thing, and asking me to give proof that I had done it. Well, since I wasn't doing it with the intention of getting into the Guinness Book of Records, I didn't have any proof, but I was able to cobble together an explanation of what I could and couldn't prove, and gave them the names of some British diplomats that I knew that had fancy titles, which is something they love in Britain. And they never asked me for the proof. They just accepted my record. But it was very nice and a great show of sportsmanship by Joel Abramson to tell the Guinness Book that I had done it. Now, one of the interesting things here, the photograph, I figured they asked for a photo, and I figured if I had a picture that had birds in it, that they might publish it in the book. And darned if they didn't. The way that I got the picture, my father, Benjamin H. Kaestner, took the photo, but my wife is not in the picture. She is crouched down behind me on the beach. This picture was taken in Fort Lauderdale, and she's got a bunch of bread. So she's throwing bread up and down, up in the air. And the seagulls are coming in over my head. So I figured that would be a picture that might make it into the book, and it worked. So this is my wife, Kimberly. I met her in December of 1986, and we had a whirlwind romance. We met December 20th, 1986, and were married on July 11th, 1987. So do the math, it's less than 6 months. In 1988, Kimberly was able to get into the Foreign Service as a computer system specialist. And we were assigned to Bogota, Colombia, which is at the time was one of the most, dangerous places in the world. This black thing in my arms is Kirtland, our kitty. He's not an outdoor cat. This is as close as he ever got to the outdoors. But Kirtland was named after the warbler. And the reason that we named our cat Kirtland is because when I got married in Michigan, my wife is from Union Lake, Michigan, my brother decided that we would go and twitch the Kirtland's warbler on my wedding day. So we were going to get up at 4 o'clock and drive 4 hours up to northern Michigan to Mayo and get the bird, and then come back just in time for me to get dressed and go to my wedding. And Kimberly put her foot down. It's the only time she's ever told me I can't go bird watching. She said, nope, nope, nope. You're not going to do that, because I'm not going to be standing at the altar while you fixing your flat tire in Saginaw or something. So anyway, I didn't get to go and see Kirtland's warbler. Well, it just turns out that when my wife had her bachelorette party, that she went to see the Kirtland's warbler with her girlfriends. So she had seen the bird and she wouldn't let me see it. So as a way of commemorating that, we named our cat Kirtland, so that every day he would be a reminder that she had gripped me off and seen the Kirtland's warbler and I had not seen it. Now in October 16th, 1989, I was doing some work visiting some American missionaries that lived in a place called Villavicencio on the lowlands, the eastern lowlands of Colombia, about 4 hours from Bogota. And on my way back, I decided to do some birding on the side of the road and heard a bird that I didn't recognize. I made a tape recording of it, and after 45 minutes of playback, I saw that it was a new species for Colombia. And about 6-7 months later, in May of 1990, I went back and with an ornithologist guy named Gary Stiles, and we collected the bird. This is an awful picture of it. This is the type specimen of Kaestner's antpitta, or Cundinamarca antpitta. About the same time, our 2 daughters were born. Katie was born in Colombia in April, about 3 months before we left. And the younger one, Laurel, was born 17 months later when we were living in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. In fact, when we collected the type specimen of the antpitta, Gary Stiles, the ornithologist, dispatched the bird because it was going into a collection. And I had this dead bird and I was so excited and proud. I wanted to show it to my wife when we got back from collecting it. And she was breastfeeding Katie at the time. And I dropped this dead bird on the pillow next to my 2-month-old infant. And Kimberly did not think that was very fun. While I was in Malaysia, I mentioned my youngest daughter, Laurel, was born there. Hank came to visit. Hank is been able to visit me almost everywhere I lived. And in addition to that, we continue our tradition of birding together. In May, we spent 2 weeks together in Colombia. And in October, we're going to do a 2-week trip to Brazil. So it's a lot of fun. He's 78 years old now, but he's still an outstanding field birder and really, really good, and just a delight to learn from him. After Malaysia, I went back to the United States. Our next overseas assignment was to Namibia. And here we are with some Himba tribesmen in far northeastern or northwestern Namibia. One of the great things about being a diplomat are the adventures that your children can go on. And our children lived all over the world and grew up in places like Egypt and India and Africa. While I was in Namibia, I was the deputy ambassador there, deputy DCM as we call it, the deputy chief of mission. We had a visit by the King of Pop, and we were able to get our picture with him. It was sort of really weird. He was standing in the corner, and you'd go stand next to him just as if he was a cardboard cutout or something. There's no interaction. You just went there, got your picture, and then moved on. Great birds in Namibia, including several, I guess 12 or 15 birds that are endemic to Western Namibia and far southwestern Angola. Since Angola is a very difficult place to get to, Most people see those birds in Namibia. This is the southern yellow-billed hornbill. And of course, our children had a wonderful time. From Namibia in, 1999, we went to Guatemala. And one of the neat things about Guatemala are the volcanoes. This volcano Pacaya was visible from our home and was erupting pretty much constantly. And we actually climbed it. And this is one of our group, the USAID director, decided to go all the way up to the very top and got this photograph of him in the volcanic mist. While I was in Guatemala, I had the opportunity to go on a temporary assignment for 6 weeks to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Had a wonderful time. And each weekend I'd go off and get birds, and did very, very well, got most of the endemic birds. Even went down to Djibouti to see the Djibouti Franklin on one weekend. This is the Duda Golf Club. If any of you all play golf in Sarasota or wherever you are, this is what the golf course looks like in Djibouti, which is in the Horn of Africa in the far northeast. On my way back on September 1st, or September 11th, 2001, the plane that I was on was flying across the Atlantic from Frankfurt, Germany to Atlanta, Delta Flight 15. And as we were going across the Atlantic, I noticed that we turned to the right. And when you're going in that direction, you never turn to the right. You're always turning to the left as you fly across the Atlantic Ocean. So I knew there's something amiss. And after a while, the pilot came on board and said that there was an indicator light problem and that they had to land in Newfoundland to check out the indicator light. Now that was just a story because we didn't know if there was a terrorist on board our plane. So we didn't want to say there's a terrorist attack in the United States and we're going to land, so our plane cannot become an instrument of terror, because then the terrorists might have done something rash. So they gave a story about landing for another reason. And our entire plane got offloaded. There were some 200 and some people, and we were taken after waiting about 27 hours, because you can imagine, Newfoundland, Gander, Newfoundland, all of a sudden 27 or 30 gigantic airplanes just drop out of the sky completely without any warning. They had to find places to house all these thousands of people. So it took a little over a day for them to figure out, and they took us to the town of Lewisport. And about half of the people slept in the homes of the villagers of Lewisport, and the other half of us slept in the church, on the church pews. And every morning we would meet in the basement of the church, and the ladies from the town of Lewisport would come and cook us 3 meals a day. One of the interesting things that happened is that at the end of the stay, we were there for about 3 days. When we got back on the plane, one of the passengers decided that she was going to take up not an offering, but a collection of money that we could donate to Lewisport to help show our appreciation for the extraordinary welcome that they gave us. I find it difficult to speak about this because I get so emotional. So anyway, they passed the hat, and I remember, I think I offered $200 or something like that. And this woman is a professional philanthropist, organizer, and she took this initial largesse from the passengers and turned it into a $2 million endowment. And I just got a communication from her a couple months ago when we were in Michigan. They have now supported the higher education of 350 children from that community. Some of them have gone off to be doctors, some of them in trades and nurses and various things. But anybody that wanted to get advanced training was able to get it through this. And this is one of the things that is actually in the Come From Away musical that if you ever get a chance to see it, do see it. And it's also, for a while, it was on Apple Plus. You could get it streaming. So you might want to look it up. It's a fantastic production. It won awards for its production qualities. Is a fantastic story and very, very well done. So highly recommended. Alrighty, I better hurry up. I'm getting a little long in the tooth here. Okay, 2002, I had the opportunity to go on a pelagic trip south of Cape Town, all the way down to Antarctica on this ship. And we had a wonderful time, 17 days. It cost a little over $2,000 for a 17-day cruise to Antarctica. And it was 115 of the top seabirders of the world that had gathered there. These are Antarctic petrels that we got down in the sea ice. This is our view of a emperor penguin. And interesting, you can tell emperor penguins from a long distance away because they float much higher in the water than king penguins. On the way back from Antarctica, it took us 5 days to get back. I had decided that we were going to see an Atlantic petrel. And everybody thought I was crazy because there were no Atlantic petrels to be seen in that area. And everybody just thought I was crazy. So every day I'd go out and everybody knew I was looking for Atlantic petrels. So one of the guys on the boat, they say these are the top seabirders in the world. One of them was an artist and actually drew a life-size Atlantic petrel, painted it, put it on a stick and went down the poop deck and put it up as a joke. Of course, the joke actually was on him because in the end we saw 24 Atlantic petrels before the end of the trip. So I was right. We did see them in the end, but it was a great joke. After then, 2002 to 2004, I was in, where is this? Cairo, Egypt. My daughter's getting big, almost in high school now. This is a scrub warbler. This is an interesting picture. You can see it's a pretty crummy picture, as a lot of my bird pictures are. This picture has actually been used several times in books because, as far as I know, even to this day, this is the only photograph of this race of DuPont's lark that's found in far northwestern Egypt. This is the Sinai. Had some great birding in the Sinai because it's a very rough place. And you get these tiny little oases around the hotels. And in the oases, you get wonderful birds. This is a bird called a corn crake, which is an endangered bird in Europe. Very, very hard to see because it lives in tall grass. And during migration, they walk around in the yard. While I was in Cairo, I went to Syria for a weekend. This is the ruins at Palmyra, which were blown up a couple of years ago by ISIS. Very, very sad. The reason I went to Syria was to get my 8,000th bird. This is a CC partridge, which I saw up along the Euphrates River, which goes in through Syria and then up into Turkey near the Turkish border. 2006, I'm back in New Delhi. This time I came back as the Minister Counselor for Consular Affairs, so I'm responsible for all the visas and American citizens operations in the whole country. I had about 250 people working for me. And one of the interesting things about India is that they are visa mad. And shortly after I arrived, I held a press conference. We had several television stations, a couple of dozen print media were there. And one of the interesting things is I had talking points and I knew what I wanted to say. A lot of what was printed in the newspapers was not what I actually said, but what the papers had hoped that I was going to say. Here's latest picture of my daughters at the Pushkar camel fair. This is one of the rare birds I saw while I was there. This is the jungle owlet, which is just rediscovered a couple of years before I saw it. And this delightful photograph is the first photograph in the wild of a Western tragopan. And nowadays, bird tourists go up there to get it. But when I went up there, I was one of the first Western birders to see the bird and the first person to get a photograph. Sadly, my camera was malfunctioning at the time, so it's a pretty crummy picture. One of the fun things about my job in New Delhi is I was responsible for consular affairs in Bhutan. And here I am on an official trip to Bhutan, meeting with the senior staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bhutan. While I was in Bhutan, they knew I was a birder, and they actually took a morning and arranged for a bird guide to take me and see the white-bellied heron and some other birds. So I was very, very fortunate to be feted like that. Back in India, this is a trip that I took to see some birds in a part of India called Ladakh, which is actually part of Tibet. And most of Ladakh is divided up between China and Pakistan. China claims and occupies about a third of it, I guess, on the southeastern side, and Pakistan has occupied about a third of Kashmir on the north side. And Ladakh is sort of part of Kashmir. It's the part of Kashmir that's in the Tibetan plateau. And to get there, you have to go over a 17,582 foot pass. And we went down off the pass and camped at 14,000 feet. And by the morning, both of my daughters had altitude sickness, and we had to rush back to get back to the capital, Leh, which is where the airport is, which is at 9,000 feet. And my daughters both were okay by the time they got back down there. But interestingly, after they were convalescing in the hotel, and I went out to do some shopping and met an American citizen there. And then the next morning we flew back to New Delhi, and I went back to work. And we learned that American citizen had died that night of altitude sickness in Leh, just a few hours after I had met him. And one of the things I do in the embassy is take care of American citizens. So we were responsible for getting his body repatriated back to the United States. A couple of the target birds up in Ladakh. This is a very, very distant black-necked crane, my last crane. And this is my last sand grouse, a Tibetan sand grouse. While I was in India, I had the opportunity again to meet my brother, who's on the right-hand side. The guy in the black jacket is John Hornbuckle, who at the time I think was the #2 birder in the world. I kind of like these two pictures just juxtaposed. These are greater adjutant stork, which is a critically endangered bird, but is very easy to see at the Guwahati garbage dump. They're, I don't know, maybe a quarter of the world population of greater adjutants lives on this dump. One of the fun things about visas, I've mentioned that visas are very important to Indians. One of the groups of people that got visas from us were the Tibetan, or the monks from the Dalai Lama. And we were having trouble with some of his monks that they were not behaving themselves on their visas. Their visas would allow them to do certain things, but they were not allowed to do other things. And they were misbehaving. So I sent a message to the Dalai Lama's representative in New Delhi that this was a problem. And His Holiness found out about it, and he was very concerned. and he wanted to apologize to me in person. So I waited till my daughter, Katie, who's the redhead on the left, had come back from college, and we managed to rendezvous with him. We ended up spending 45 minutes just with our family and the Dalai Lama and his interpreter. He speaks pretty good English, but he always has an interpreter with him. And I must say, you can see the smiles on our faces. It was really, really an amazing opportunity to just sort of hang out and chat about things. We talked a little bit about Tibet, because since I'm a diplomat, I'm always trying to get some information, but mostly we just talked about life and happiness and just normal stuff for 45 minutes. Okay, 2012. This is another thing. I told you to remember the what was that guy's name? Gosh. The thing that I asked you to remember, which I've now forgotten.
Robert Redford.
Redford, that's a man's name, Robert Redford. Something happened during this training that I'll talk to you about at the end. This is in preparation to going to Mazar-e Sharif, Afghanistan, the home of a very famous blue mosque. And here I am with my security detail at Mazar-e Sharif. The US government spent $27 million a year on security for me and my staff. And this is what it looked like. This is what $27 million gets you. Did a lot of birding on the military base. I lived in a 20-foot container for a year. And all the birding I did was on the base. I was not allowed to leave the military base unless it was for official purposes. So I never once went birding outside of the military base. This is a Spanish sparrow sitting on concertina wire. This is a rosy pastor or rosy starling that came through in huge numbers in the springtime. After I left Afghanistan in 2014, I had my last 2 years as a diplomat in Frankfurt, Germany. And while I was there, the local newspaper did a little thing on my bird watching. And then I got to retire in September of 2016. First thing we did is went to Australia with my wife. My wife loved Australia. I knew she would. Here's a galah. It's just amazing, the number of cockatoos and number of species and individuals. We went up north. Here's my wife getting up close and personal with a southern cassowary. They have a very large toenail in the middle, which can eviscerate you. And there's a famous case a couple of years ago of somebody being killed by their pet cassowary. We had to go to Papua New Guinea. This is one of the famous mudmen of New Guinea. The reason was that in 2016, a new family had been recognized that I had not seen. And since I had been the first to see all the families, every time a new family was recognized, I had either seen it or immediately went out and got it. And there are 3 trips I had to get since 1986 to catch up on new families, and this was one of them. This is a wattled plowbill, and it was recognized in 2016. So I went out and got the family to make sure that my family list was up to date. Another thing we went down on a subantarctic cruise from New Zealand. Fantastic opportunity if you ever have a chance. The yellow-eyed penguin we saw down there, subantarctic snipe. Fortunately, on our boat, Peter Harrison, one of the best seabirders in the world, just happened to be leading a tour on the boat. Here he is talking about the anatomy of a royal albatross. You can see the separated nose openings on the albatross. Here's some Buller's albatrosses feeding off the back of our boat. A fantastic experience. And this is a photograph by one of the guides named Lyle Gwynn, who let me use the photo if I gave him credit, and I certainly happy to. It gives you an idea of what the seas are like in these southern oceans. From there, another one of my sort of bucket list trips with my wife was the Galapagos. Here's a cactus finch, a greater frigate bird. This is a red-footed booby. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. You can actually see me here and the other people standing around reflected in the eyeball of the booby. Every once in a while, I get a good photograph, but not too often. We also went to Madagascar, another place. I'd been there 3 times birding, but I wanted to have Kimberly go and enjoy it. This is a black and white ruffed lemur that unexpectedly jumped from behind Kimberly and landed on her head. And she thought it was the funniest thing that happened to her all day. Also saw the helmet vanga. About the same time, this is 2017, I guess. So I got a message from the U.S. Embassy in Bogota, Colombia. The Colombian government made a peace deal with the FARC guerrilla group, and they wanted to find ways of bringing economic development to rural areas immediately. So the way that one of the ways they did that was to look at promoting bird tourism. And somebody at the U.S. Embassy had worked for me, been one of my vice consuls, and knew I was interested in birds and had lived in Colombia. She reached out to me, and I worked for a couple of years pro bono with the Colombian government. And the sort of the highlight of that was a parrillada diplomática, where we took a bunch of media people and went around rural areas in northern Colombia, some of which had been in the FARC, to promote a bird trail that had been set up partially with the assistance of the U.S. Audubon Society. So just a way of helping promote economic development and bird conservation in Colombia. This is one of my favorite Colombian birds, and is my wife Kimberly's favorite, so I always have to have it in my presentation. This is a white-booted racket-tail, a fabulous little hummingbird. Again, going back to high-quality bird photography, this is a Puerto Rican parrot coming into roost in the evening, and the reason that it's in here is that is bird number 9,000. Kimberly was with me and took this photograph in Puerto Rico. Since then, I've taken lots of trips. I'm going to just sort of go through a bunch of them fairly quickly since we're running out of time. This is the Hokotoko ant petter that was discovered by Robert Ridgely a few years ago in southern Ecuador. Violet purple coronet from the western Andes of Ecuador. A glistening green tanager. Love this picture of my brother birding at night in eastern Ecuador in San Isidro. Another fabulous tanager from Peru. In 2019, I started working for Rock Jumper Bird Tour, and Rock Jumper had a trip, and it's funny. I've never. One of the things that I did when I was working for the Colombian government was to promote bird tours, and I had reached out both to Rock Jumper and to ABA, since I knew Adam Riley's over here in the bald, shortest guy over here. Adam is an old friend and wonderful guy. He's one of the founders of Rock Jumper, and I'm a life member of the ABA. So I sent both organizations and urged them to go to Colombia, and whether it had anything to do with my request or not, but just by coincidence, they set up a birding safari to Bogota and Cali, where they took 75 people, and they broke the group up into smaller groups, and then they stayed for about a week in Bogota and about a week in Cali, and then they'd go off in different directions and bird watch in all the places around those two cities. So this is in the summer of 2019. And this is when I signed up to become a part-time bird guide for Rock Jumper. And here's one of the groups. Here's Adam in the pale hat. I'm over here in green. This is the local guide. And this is Diego Calderon, who is the #1 bird guide in Colombia. We're looking for the green bearded helmet crest in the Paramo south of Bogota. That same week, I flew immediately from Bogota to Indonesia and did a bit of birding on a bird tour, and then about 2 weeks by myself. And this is one of the animals that I saw on the island of Siau, Siau. You can look it up, tiny little place. It's an active volcano, has an endemic owl that is unknown. It has an endemic pitta that I saw, and it has an endemic tarsier, which I also saw. And this is the Siau tarsier. Also did some scuba diving in there. And one of the interesting things is when you're underwater, you can hear the volcano sort of rumbling the whole time that you're underwater. And the dive master, when I got up, he said that his last clients, he gets about 1 client a month because it's off the beaten track. He said he had a couple from Germany, and they were underwater and they heard the volcano going off, and they immediately surfaced and got on the next boat and got out of town. They were afraid that they were going to die. This is a green-backed kingfisher, bird that I took in Sulawesi, which is near Siau in the northeastern part of Indonesia. Now we're fast forwarding a little bit. Here I am. This may have been my very first formal bird tour for Rock Jumper. This is in southern India in February of 2020, just before the lockdown. The greater racket-tailed drongo. This is a Sri Lankan chicken, jungle fowl, white yellow-browed bulbul from Sri Lanka. I actually got a lifer on that trip. This is the Sri Lankan bay owl. The next trip I did was to northern India. So I did 3 trips: to southern India, Sri Lanka, and then northern India. This is the group in northern India. Wonderful time, beautiful scenery. This is a red-naped ibis. And the reason this picture in here, this guy on the right is the son of Bolu Khan, who was the guide that was with my brother and me when we were in Bharatpur in 1982. And his son Ansar is one of the top bird guides in northern India now. And his father is still alive and just got a lifetime achievement award from the Ministry of Environment for the state of Rajasthan. So it's fantastic. So many years later 40 years later to bump into Bolu Khan's son. And as I'd mentioned before, the ibisbill is a much easier bird to see now. This is a place near Corbett Park at the base of the Himalayas, where it's a stakeout every year. One of the nice things about birding in northern India are tigers, and we had 11 tiger sightings on our Rock Jumper tour. We also saw sloth bears, and my old friend, the jungle babbler. Never tired of jungle babblers. So after India, we had the lockdown. I think it was like 3 days after I got back in March of 2020. By December 2020, I was traveling again, and my wife and I, Kimberly and I, went to Kenya, and we had gotten a Rock Jumper advertisement about a Kenya tour. And my wife Kimberly had never been there. I went there frequently when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Eastern Congo. But Kimberly had never been, and she loves seeing animals, so I wanted to take her. The tour didn't go, but we ended up doing a custom tour that Rock Jumper organized, and I was able to organize the tour around the dozen or so birds that I needed in Kenya. So I had a wonderful time. I got all the birds. This is a golden palm weaver, I think, the secretary bird. We had just a fabulous time. One of the great things about traveling then is that all the lodges were empty because of the lockdown. And literally, we were the only guest in most of the places where we stayed. So when you were out on game drives and whatever, there were no other cars, there was no dust. You found a leopard or a lion or a kill or whatever, you're the only car there watching it instead of lining up with 10 or 15 other cars. After Kenya was so good in December of 2020 that in early 2021 we went to Tanzania and did the same thing. And Kimberly went off to the island of Pemba to hang out at the beach for a couple of days, and I went to the Usambara Mountains, where I saw some birds that I had missed earlier when I'd visited there, including the recently split Usambara thrush, which was number 9,500. This is later that year. Hank and I went back to Colombia. I had a great trip, and we love to say neither of us are big drinkers, so we tend to celebrate our birds with ice cream. In 2021, I guess it is, I did a trip to Peru, and the main reason for this trip was they had a paper had been published splitting the Rufous ant pitta. It actually took 3 species, the Rufous ant pitta, chestnut ant pitta, and bicolored ant pitta, those 3, and mushed them all together, and 13 species came out the other end. So basically there are 10 new species of ant pitta that were described. I had seen, of the 13, I had seen 8 of them, and 5 of them I had not seen. And all of them were in Peru. So I went down to Peru. This is the first of the 5 I got. This is the Sina ant pitta. And at the time, I think I was only the 3rd person to see this bird in the wild. Is now since been seen by others. The location is fairly well known, but it was really an exciting trip. On the theme of ant pitta, since I discovered a new ant pitta, I really love to see ant pittas. This is a Rufous naped ant pitta. It's a different race in northwestern Ecuador that has a different call, different color eyes. May well be split at some point in the future. And I was able to get back to northeastern Colombia and see the birds that I had described. This is Gralaria Kaestneri, the Cundinamarca ant pitta. It's now coming to a feeder near the town of Guayabatal, which is about 2 hours from Bogota, the capital of Colombia. Let's see, last year, we're in 2023 now, so this would have been April 2022. I went to India. This is northeastern part of India. I had a goal of getting 1,000 birds in India, and did reach the goal, which was a lot of fun. Along the way, I picked up 22 or 23 lifers. We also saw rhinos. This is the slender-billed Scimitar babbler, one of my favorite eastern Himalayan birds. And this is an interesting story. I was eating trail mix. When I eat trail mix, I a little bit anal, maybe a little OCD. I first eat the M&Ms, and then I eat the nuts, and then I eat the raisins. So I'd eaten the M&Ms, and I ate the nuts, and I was eating the raisins. And when I put my hand up to the mouth to sort of take the raisins out of my palm of my hand, one of them wasn't coming into my mouth. I couldn't figure it out. I tried 3 times or so. And then finally, I took a real close look at it. And this raisin is actually a land leech that had attached itself when I was trying to take a picture of a flower. And which is why it wasn't coming into my mouth, because it was firmly attached. So you have to be careful in India. That was in April of 2022. In May, Kimberly and I went on a trip to Aldabra Atoll. And one of the things I try to do with my wife is to go to places where we can go scuba diving together. And Aldabra was perfect because there were a handful of endemic birds. There were some wonderful fish. This is the Mauritius blue angelfish, which is only recently discovered in the Seychelles. And we got new records for it for 3 new islands where it had been unknown. So I don't know if it's expanding or what's going on, but it turned out to be fairly common. One of the great birds in Aldabra is a white-throated rail that's flightless. And amazingly, there's a white-throated rail in Madagascar that's considered to be the same species, even though this one is flightless. And it's really hard for me to imagine that a flightless race of a bird can be the same species as one that can fly. But that's the way the list crumbles right now. Now this bird has been split. This is the Malagasy sacred ibis. It's split from the one in Africa. It has a white eye, among other things. This is the Aldabra Durango. At this point, I'm only short 1 Durango in the world, which is on the island of Mayotte. This bird has the distinction of being the bird that has the shortest life on my life list. This is Humboldt's sunbird. I saw it in May of 2022, and in August of 2022, it got lumped and taken off of the list. So it was only a lifer for me for about 3 months. Last summer, Kimberly and I went on a trip that had been postponed a couple of times to Svalbard in the Arctic. This boat might look familiar to if any of you guys are sharp. This is the sister ship of the boat that Kimberly and I took to the subantarctic islands of New Zealand in 2016. And indeed, amazingly enough, this porthole right here is room 503, and we're in the exact same room on both ships, completely by chance. Not a lot of birds and no lifers for me in Svalbard, but it's a magical place with all the ice. Polar bears are one of the real highlights up there. Just an amazing place and well worth going up, even if there aren't a lot of lifers. Last fall, I had a couple of guiding gigs with Rock Jumper in Argentina. So I went down first to do a little cleanup in northwestern Argentina. This is a red-tailed comet hummingbird, Orog cincloides, a Monte yellowfinch, South American painted snipe, elegant crested tinamou. This bird is Moreno's ground dove, and this was number 9,700 up in the mountains, high mountains of northwestern Argentina. My guiding for Rock Jumper was down in southern part of Argentina, down in Terra del Fuego. Here's our group in front of a very large, very active glacier. This is a Blackus cincloides, white-bellied seed snipe was my last seed snipe. It was very exciting to see that. Chilean hawk just came and perched right in front of us. And then from there, we went from Terra del Fuego on a trip to Antarctica. And I was at one of 8 Rock Jumper guides. We had, the entire ship were bird watchers. There were no other people except for people from Rock Jumper and 2 other groups. So this is a kelp goose that I photographed on the beach of the Falkland Islands. And this has not been photoshopped, it's just the way it looks. These are imperial shags. We were there, and we were about ready to leave, and Kimberly said, "Did you get a picture of those shags?" And I said, "Okay, let me get a picture of the shags." And this is what came out. A white bridled finch is another characteristic bird of the Falkland Islands. And from the Falkland Islands, we went to South Georgia. This is the South Georgia pintail or yellow-billed pintail. This is the South Georgian cormorant or shag. South Georgian pipit. This is the most southerly passerine bird in the world. And we saw lots of Atlantic petrels. And it's interesting that people, this is the first time I'd ever done this trip, but the guides that had done numerous trips on the same itinerary said that in all their lives, they'd only seen one Atlantic petrel. We saw a dozen of them. So obviously Atlantic petrels like me. We also saw 25 emperor penguins. We were able to get very close to the emperor penguin colony at Snow Hill because the sea ice was so had melted so much and there was so much open ocean. So we were able, and because we owned the ship, the captain went in an area that he would never normally go to. Antarctic petrels were very rare down there. We saw lots of them on my trip in 2002, but we only saw 2 of them on this trip. After the Antarctic cruise, I did another tour just for this bird. It was I think it was a 1-week tour for the hooded grebe, and fortunately we were able to see it in Terra del Fuego. Okay, 2023, March, Vietnam. I spent a month in Vietnam getting some wonderful, it was a bar-bellied pitta, blue pitta, collared laughing thrush, short-tailed parrotbill, great birds in Vietnam, pale-throated wren babbler, white-throated wren babbler, one of the rarest birds in the world. Only a handful of people have ever seen it. It was 11 kilometers, 7 miles, on a tiny little trail up into the mountains, camping, and eventually saw it. After Vietnam, I had to do two, I didn't have to. I did a month in Vietnam and a month in the Philippines, and I don't like to be away from Kimberly's for so long. So there were 2 weeks between the 2 trips. So Kimberly flew out and we went scuba diving, and she loves aquatic mammals. So we went to a place that was famous for dugongs. It's sort of like the Florida manatee, but it has a tail that looks like a whale. It's a fluke. It's not a rounded tail. This is from the Philippines. This is a Philippine tarsier. Purple-throated sunbird from the Philippines. This is a Tablas drongo, very, very rare bird. Okay, so that's all of the birds. Now, I'd mentioned before this thing about my girlfriend's mothers and Robert Redford and all that. And I showed you a certificate that I got from a Scatatuck in December 2012, where I was training to go to Afghanistan. That training program was staffed by a lot of Afghan refugees. And for some reason, a lot of the Afghan refugees, or a lot of Afghans, speak Hindi, which is the primary language of India. And I spoke Hindi because I had done visa interviews in Hindi back in the early 1980s. So while I was there at the training station, at the training camp, I became good friends with a lot of the Afghans, largely because their English is very poor and I could speak to them in Hindi. So at the graduation, we had a very nice dinner. We're all sitting on the floor eating Afghan food. And one of the Afghan participants, one of the trainees, looked at me and said, "You know, you're a very handsome guy. You look just like Hafez al-Assad." Now, Hafez al-Assad, who is the guy on the left, is the father of Bashir al-Assad, who is a maniacal, genocidal dictator in the country of Syria. So in 40 years, I've gone from being compared to a Hollywood heartthrob to being compared to a genocidal Syrian dictator. So maybe that's what birding has done to me. And that's the end.
Wow.
I'm sorry it took a little too long.
And
Is
you're
anybody,
still not done. That's amazing.
is anybody still there?
Yeah.
75 people are still here. Yep, you kept them.
Does
Any
anybody have any questions?
I see
No
no
open questions.
I'm delighted to answer any kind of questions. There's no, I come from a tradition that there is nothing such as a bad question.
Peter, I have a question. Jean, I'm sorry, it's a little dark here. Could you spell out the name of that antpitter that you described, that you found?
Cundinamarca, C-U-N-D-I-N-A-M-A-R-C-A.
Uh-huh. Yeah. AMARCA. Okay.
Dinamarca. It's in eBird. You can go and see it. And
Yeah.
one of the interesting things about it is when I discovered the bird, I made a recording because that's how I saw it, is I made a recording and I played it back, and the bird, after over 45 minutes, was able to get it closer and closer until I saw it. And that recording I gave to Cornell, and it's in the Cornell collection. And I got a copy of that and made an eBird checklist for that day. So the original recording and my original description of having seen the bird for the very first time, that first time when I'm describing the bird that's in front of me, is actually in that eBird checklist. So if you go into the Cundinamarca antpitta, the eBird checklist for October 16th, 1989, and you'll see that checklist will have a recording, and you play the recording and you can actually hear what I heard the very first time that anyone ever heard that bird, and then my description as I saw it the very first time.
Well, congratulations, by the way. I mean, rarefied air having a bird named after you.
It was
kidding.
it's a lot of fun, and it has changed my life, especially in Colombia. Because when I'm birding in Colombia, everybody wants to get selfies with me, sign their bird books and stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, you're a rock star.
They're eBird crazy down there.
Yeah, true.
So Peter, you're getting a lot of acknowledgement and thanks for your wonderful talk. And somebody is asking you to please write your book. And somebody is asking, do you have a sponsor or sponsors for all these trips?
Kind of, yes. 2021. Yeah, I think 2 years ago, I was going to Colombia, and one of the Diego Calderon was being sponsored by Swarovski, and Swarovski mailed some stuff to me so I would hand carry it down to him. And I said, I wonder if Swarovski would give me some binoculars. So I asked Swarovski if they wanted to give me some binoculars, and they said yes. So they gave me some nice NL Pure, the very top of the line binoculars, and a spotting scope. So I've got a Swarovski spotting scope and binoculars. And the way I paid them back is I tagged them. I'm not great on social media, but I wrote an article for them for their online magazine. And if you want to see it, it's about thick-billed parrots in Mexico. So if you go into the Swarovski website, you might be able to find it's a fun article about finding that bird.
Beautiful photography in that article.
Yeah, it was unfortunate that they took pictures of captive birds. So I had all my pictures are wild birds, but they didn't. The birds are far away, so they weren't quite as good as the pictures in the zoo, and I wasn't too wild about that. But still, love me. Hey, look who's here! My wife just showed up.
Sneak around.
Kimberly's trying to sneak around. We're just basking in the afterglow.
So somebody's asking, what do you think your final lifeless count will be? Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, my goodness gracious. That's so hard to say because the number of birds has increased in my lifetime from, well, and not only from my lifetime, but from, say, the 1970s when I was in college, from 8,600 to 11,000. So we've gone from 8,600 to 11,000. Somebody did some study not too long ago and suggested that there could be as many as 20,000 birds. So right now, one of the things I hope to achieve on this trip to Indonesia is to see my 9,901st bird. And the reason for that one is that will be my 90%. That will represent 90% of the world's birds that I will have seen. So if I see 90% of 20,000, that obviously is an awful lot more. It's over 18,000. But I don't think I'm going to keep up the pace in the future. Right now, I'm making a big push to 10,000, and quite frankly, it's not sustainable economically. I'm not a wealthy person, and I'm cashing out my retirement and stuff like that because I figured that I'd rather spend it while I can still see birds rather than when I'm in a retirement home or a nursing home. So, but I can't do that for too much longer. I do, and going back to the sponsoring, I work for a rock jumper. So when I'm on a rock jumper tour, I get paid. It's very, very hard work, as anybody's been on one of those tours. The tour guides work from very early in the morning till very late at night, and you're always on duty. So I do get paid for that. And I also get an employee discount when I take tours with Rock Jumper. So that helps a bit, but I wouldn't say it was a sponsorship, but it's it's a form of, I don't want to say employment, but it's a way that I can defer my costs of birding.
So Clay Bliznick is asking, have you ever been to the Rubeho Mountains in Tanzania? I recently read about a few hard to see endemic species there.
I have been to Rubeho. It's sort of, this is the story of my life. And the reason it's the story of my life is that when I was overseas, living overseas, I had responsible jobs. I would very often, I think 5 different times I was on local school boards. Twice I was on the board of elders of the local church. So I had a normal life. And when it was time for, sort of family vacations, I went on family vacations. So most of my birding I did on weekends. I saw the ibis bill in Ladakh over the Labor Day weekend. So Rubeho is the same sort of thing. We were coming back from Tanzania, and we had to get COVID tests. This is in 2021. We had to get COVID tests before we came back to the US. And it was a 2-day wait to get the results of the COVID test. So Kimberly stayed in a beach hotel in Dar es Salaam, and I went to Rubeho for 2 days. Now, it takes a day to get to Rubeho, and it takes a day to get back. So my birding in Rubeho was a total of about 4 hours. So I got some of the really good birds, but I didn't have time to go after the partridge. And ironically, shortly after I was there, Ross Gaillardi, who's one of the real superstar young birders of the world, lives up in Pennsylvania. He went to Rubeho and stayed there for several days camping and found a new species of sunbird. So I could have, if I had been there longer, I might have had a chance to find another new species. So Rubeho is a great place to see the really tough stuff you need to hike up in the mountains and camp. And I just was birding on the roadside for one morning, and I got, I think there's like 5 or 6 really good birds, and I got 3 of them.
So somebody asked, what would you do when an unknown bird quickly crossed your path before you had a chance to identify it?
Look at the next bird. There's so many birds.
Yes.
It kind of depends on the circumstances. If it's a bird that I think, if I'm going after something and I think it might be a new bird, then I will try very hard to get a look at it. To get onto my life list, I have to be convinced based on my own knowledge of what it is. And that includes herd birds, but I don't count herd birds that other people tell me are herd birds. So if we're out in the forest and the guide says, oh, there's a undulated tinamou singing over there, if I didn't know that was an undulated tinamou before he told me, it would not go onto my list. And the same thing with sightings. If I see a bird, I have to see it well enough to be able to identify it myself. So if I get a poor look at something, and a lot of birds are darn hard to identify. We were just in Vietnam, and I was uploading some photographs into eBird, and some of the pictures of the philosophers, I have relatively decent pictures of these birds, and I can't put them into eBird because we were identifying them based on their calls, and they're not calling in my pictures.
This has been wonderful. I can't thank you enough. And you're getting so many thank yous and appreciations on the chat. I just want to say to everybody that Peter is very generous. There are many articles about him and by him, and he's easy to reach if you have more questions and comments. And I don't want to speak for you, but other people could easily find you to invite you to speak to them.
Absolutely.
You're very generous.
I put my contacts on my eBird profile,
Yes.
which is very easy to find. And the reason I do that is I'm delighted to share my knowledge and my stories with anybody that wants to hear them.
I just really want to thank you so much, and to say that not only am I impressed with you as a birder, but I'm really impressed by your generosity as a human being. When I've read about you and what you've said, you're very kind and competitive and wonderful, and totally really an inspiration to us all of us birders and non-birders. So thank you so much.
I'm speechless, and thank you. It's very, very kind words. Thank you.
Peter, thank you so much for taking time out to speak to our group. I enjoyed your program so much, and it makes me think of all the wonderful places I haven't been to yet, but Australia's on my list. So
definitely. Yeah. And I've got lots of talks about specific places, and I can go into depth if you ever want to have me back, if you're ever.
Oh, we'd love it.
Oh, cool.
Hard
Yes.
for a speaker.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely. Thanks so much. And thank you everybody for joining, and all of our wonderful members and friends. Stay cool, stay dry, and we'll see you in October.
Alrighty. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye,
again.
everyone.
Thank you.